So welcome to Comm 281 Public Speaking. As we're going to begin to consider this first section, you do have the PowerPoints on this also that I'll be showing you here, so you can review that later. Just a reminder, next week, the public speaking, your first speech is due. You can have during the whole Monday to get it in. I don't mind if it's in later in the Monday, but to get it in on Monday, what you need to do is to develop your speech, to record your speech, to then download your speech onto YouTube. You can Google YouTube and ask, how do you do this? And you'll get instructions how to do that if you already don't know. You may even know somebody that knows how to do that. That will make it that much easier. So we're not meeting next week in class because we literally would be spending the whole week if we were in person listening to all the speeches. And so therefore, by getting your speech in, I'm able to spend time with your speech next week. And to get back that evaluation that I'll do, I'll fill out an evaluation form, a short one. I will scan it and I will email that back to you. Okay, so that will be the assignment for next week, our first speech. A reminder that right after the second assignment, it's not a speech, but it's that evaluation of the speech. And if you go to page on the syllabus, if you go to page 4, you will see at the very top part the evaluation of your personal story speech. That's the one that's due next week. It's only a 3 to 4 minute speech. So first do the speech and then spend a few days after you do that next week. You should do it right away just so you get the assignment done. Write a 2-page paper. The instructions are on the top of page 4 for you in regard to what to do, and send that in to me. Okay, so those two things are due. Next week, your speech is due. You have 1 week later before that little short 2-page paper is due. You can do it anytime after you have finished your speech. So that's just a reminder that that speech is due to you. And to you students who are going to be watching this via recording, same holds to you. So want you to get that in so that we can have this completed and continue moving on. Now I want to get to the topic for today on this course in public speaking. And I'm just going to get my computer here there lined up. And really a key question is thinking about the question, what is communication? What really is communication? We have communication happening all around us. We know that. We have friends and we talk to them. We're communicating, and they talk to us. They're communicating. We're talking to each other. We're communicating. I'm speaking to you right now. I am communicating to you. You're going to be giving speeches, handing in speeches for next week. That is communication. Communication is just something you can not ignore. It's happening all around you. You might say, well, what if I'm deaf and I can't hear? That doesn't mean you're not communicating. You learn sign language is communicating. You learn to read lips. That is communicating. You're observing your world. You're observing people around you. That is communication. Communication literally is a part of who we are and what we do. And the reality is, it is necessary to send and have understood a message of some sort, whether it's whether it's a question or whether it is a observation. We are communicating. So we need to understand that communication is simply happening all around us. I want to talk about the colors of communication, and this is true of any place of communication, but it really is definitely true in public speaking. The fact is that and probably many, if not all of you, have a driver's license and you drive. If not, you've been in a car, likely, where somebody else was driving, or another a bus or something of that nature where somebody is driving the vehicle for you and it's your form of transportation. That person, whoever is driving the bus, it has to be very cognizant of the lights, the traffic lights, and the colors have meaning. For instance, the green light means go. So when you see the green light, that gives you permission to start moving ahead. In public speaking, when you stand before an audience and they are sitting there looking at you, they are likely giving you the green light. In other words, go ahead, share your presentation. I am listening to you. And that's great. That's the color you want to have happen. It is very painful to give a speech in front of a bunch of people and then find out nobody was listening to you. That's very discouraging. And so the green light is the preferred, desired light to be experienced when you are public speaking. The yellow light means caution. Slow down. Prepare because the red light is likely going to come on. Okay? Now, that is something that can happen in public speaking. You can have an audience that started listening to you, but for whatever reason are beginning, or some in the audience are beginning to think about something else. That's a warning. And you have to try to pay attention to understand when those things happen and try to do things to prevent it from happening. But it is a reality that there are people who will quit listening to you. And they have a responsibility to listen to you, but you have a responsibility to try your best to ensure they do listen to you. And the yellow light's a warning that they might come back to listening to you, and then again, they might just leave. Not physically leave. Perhaps they can't do that. Socially, it's not it's inappropriate, and other reasons it would not be advisable. But that doesn't mean that because a person's sitting in your room and in your audience that they're actually listening to you. They may not be. And it's not always necessarily true that if people are looking at you, they are listening. The fact is that many people have learned to play the game. They understand what it is like to pretend to be listening, to look at you and to even shake their head, yes, but they're not listening to you. Those things happen. And so when the red light comes on, that's a frightening experience because the reality is people are not listening to you at all. They're sitting there. They may not be able to leave physically, but they've left mentally and they're not listening to what you're having to say. And so in public speaking, you want find some way by which to keep your audience with you. It is not enough for you to just organize a speech and read it and then walk away saying, I gave my speech. You have to do a lot more than just that. And you need to be aware of that. And the more that you do, the better the situation is for you in regard to being effective. I mean, if you're going to have to give a speech, you would like to think people would listen. And beyond that, you'd like to think people would do something based on what you have to share. Here's a definition of communication. Human communication is a continuous, irreversible, transactive process involving communicators who occupy different but overlapping environments and are simultaneously senders and receivers of messages, many of which are distorted by physical and psychological noise. Let me go over that again. Human communication is a continuous, it's always happening. It's always going on. In fact is, let me just say something I said last week. You cannot not communicate. You are always communicating. If you fold your hands and you say, I refuse to say anything, I refuse to communicate, you are communicating. Your nonverbals are communicating the whole time. and your tone of voice communicates, and your words communicate. You cannot not communicate. You are communicating. So it's continuous. It's irreversible. When something has been said or perceived to have been said, it's been said. You cannot say, "Oh, I just scribbled that out. I didn't say that." No, when it's been said, it's irreversible. If you say something and you insult somebody, the person will remember that, but that doesn't mean you cannot be forgiven. If you say, "I apologize, that was inappropriate of me to have said what I said," the person can forgive you and forget about it, but it's still irreversible because it's been said or it has been written. Human communication is a continuous, irreversible, transactive process. There's a give and take. You're sharing, I'm listening, and I'm receiving. I share, and you are now listening, and you're receiving. And we're giving back and forth information or compliments or thoughts. So it's always going on. It's irreversible. Human communication is a continuous, irreversible, transactive process involving communicators who occupy different but overlapping environments. So we're all communicators, non-verbally and verbally, and we are here. We occupy different but overlapping environments. Here's an example. We're taking this course right now. Now, normally I teach this course in the classroom. Now, suddenly, because of COVID-19, for the time being, I have to teach it this way. I've had to make so many changes, and I'm still learning how to make all these changes. Okay? But we are still in the same classroom together right now. We're together. Now, students who have to take this when I record it, who will listen to it, they become part of this class via listening to the recordings. We occupy different but overlapping environments. You're in your room listening and watching, and I'm here in my office here that used to be my daughter's bedroom years ago, and it's now my office that I use. I use this all the time, even if I'm not teaching like this. I use it for where I do all my work. I have behind me, I have my my diplomas over here. I have a bookshelf over here, bookshelf. I've got my printer here. This is a desk that goes like this. Is a window to give some light. This is my classroom. There's a clock right up there. I can see roughly what time it is right now. This is my environment. And you have your environment. But we also have this environment of Zoom. And so we have an overlapping environment happening at the same time. So we're in the same class, we're in different classrooms individually. And we are at the same time simultaneously senders and receivers of messages. You're always sending in some way, and you're always receiving messages. There are times you use words in sending messages. If you're a public speaker, you're doing that. But the audience doesn't just listen to your words, they're looking at your facial expressions. Have you ever listened to somebody that was really passionate about what they were speaking about? Their face showed their determination or their pleasure in talking about this topic. That is communicating non-verbally. And then they use words to express. And then they use other nonverbals, hand gestures, facial contortions, eye contact. All these are nonverbal factors in related to communication. We're always being a sender and a receiver. We're always sending a message to be interpreted, and we're always receiving messages that we need to interpret. So this is going on all the time. Human communication is a continuous, irreversible, transactive process involving communicators who occupy different but overlapping environments and are simultaneously senders and receivers of messages. That's going on all the time in our lives. many of which are distorted by physical and psychological noise. So as we're listening to a message, what's happening in regard to our physical well-being and our psychological well-being and comes to bear on interpreting what we're actually saying. If you are sick physically, it's hard to focus. If you're in pain, it's hard to focus physically. But that's equally true psychologically. If you have just received bad news, that's painful. That is difficult. That is not easy to handle. And it's very hard for us to recover. And so sometimes we can be sitting in a room, people are, a presentation's being made, but because we're working through something in our physical body or our mind, we may not be listening well. And it becomes noise. I've had that happen. I've been in situations where somebody was making a presentation, but I was trying to work out an issue or a problem going on in my life, and I had psychological noise happening. Here's an example of that. I was sitting in a large classroom. There was a presenter, and it was wide, not too deep. And my wife was sitting to my right, and this person was speaking, and I had a piece of paper and a pencil. And I was writing feverishly. And the more I wrote, the more the speaker got excited. Somebody was really interested in what he was saying and writing notes. And he became more animated and more excited at the fact that somebody was really writing down what he was saying. And Joanne, my wife, sitting to my right, looked over at what I was writing, and she said, "What are you doing? He thinks you're writing notes about what he's saying." I wasn't. I kind of knew the topic, but I wasn't paying attention to him at all. I was working on my doctoral degree. I was working on my research project, and I came up against a problem, a glitch. If I could not figure out this problem, I was going to have to start all over again with a brand new topic. And I'd already spent 1 year laying out the foundations of my research. And now I was in a position where I might have to change, and that would be a year lost. That was frightening. And I was sitting there trying to think, what is it? And at first, I couldn't think about it. I couldn't get the answer to this big issue. And all of a sudden it came to me. I knew what to do. And so I got that piece of paper and that pencil, piece of paper and the pencil out, and I started writing down my thoughts so that I wouldn't lose them. If I kept them up here, I might forget them. But if I get them on paper, I can revisit those thoughts and I'll know what's being said, what I was thinking about. So I wasn't listening to the speaker. I was getting notes down about something else. Yes, that wasn't very nice to him. See, people might have physical or psychological noise in their way. And I had psychological noise. I might lose a whole year of research if I couldn't answer this question. And all of a sudden it came to me. And I got it down. And what I got down on paper, I couldn't believe it. It was so simple, straightforward, but I couldn't see it until all of a sudden I got it down. And then I realized, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And this is good. And so it's so important to remember that human communication is a continuous, irreversible, transactive process involving communicators who occupy different but overlapping environments and are simultaneously senders and receivers of messages, many of which are distorted by physical and psychological noise. Just for a few moments, I'm going to just share about the functions of communication. See, communication meets needs, and there are 4 needs I see. One, it meets physical needs. Okay, when you go see a doctor because you're not feeling well, you don't just sit there and look at the doctor. You let the doctor know that you're not feeling well. And the doctor begins to ask you questions. And you begin to describe it. And all of a sudden, a physical need is met. When I went to visit for a doctor, it was just for a checkup a few years ago. And at the end, You probably had a physical checkup where they take the stethoscope and they ask you to breathe in, and and they got the ears on and they're listening as they put the little funnel beside your back and your front, and they're listening carefully. And he kept doing this a little bit longer than usual, and I kept thinking, what's with him? And he stopped finally. And he said, "You know what? I think I'm hearing a heart murmur." Well, that got my attention. When you mentioned the word heart, that's kind of scary. He says, "I think you have a heart murmur." I wasn't sure what a heart murmur was, but I found out. And I realized that the heart murmur meant that for some reason, in one of the four valves that are connected to the heart sends the blood to the valve inside the valve. And the valve opens to take it, then it shuts, and then it sends the blood out to that part of the body it's responsible for. But when the valve, which is just a little cylinder, it's about that wide and about that round, it got four of them. When it opens, it opens because it has a little lip, like three little triangles that open and the blood flows in. It shuts, and then it lets that blood go, and then it opens again, more blood from the heart, and it just that's what it does all the time, just constantly doing this. Well, what was happening, as it turned out, is that I had one heart valve. It's called the aorta valve, right in the front middle part of my chest. That was a birth defect, and so when it opened, it didn't stay open long enough for all the blood to get out, and then it would shut, still have some blood there, and it creates a swish sound. And so that's what a heart murmur is. Your valve is not working properly, and it's not letting all the blood out before new blood can close and let new blood come in. And I ended up having a heart surgery about a year and a half later to correct that. They put in another valve right here that allowed the physical need to be met. But how did that happen? It was communication between the doctor and I, and he said, "You have this issue." Then I went to see a specialist who went and did testing and came back and said, "Yes, you do. You don't need to do anything yet, but it's mild. But when it becomes problematic, you're going to have the surgery." A physical need was met. He communicated to me. He communicated back to my doctor. Later, I went back to my doctor. He kept listening, and then finally he said, "You know what? A year and a half later, a year later, you have to go for another ultrasound," and they found out that my valve had gotten worse. So now I had to start preparing for an operation. I ended up going to the heart surgeon with my wife. We sat and talked, and he explained things. And then eventually I ended up being put on an operating table, put to sleep, where they opened me up and put a new valve in. A physical need was met. Another need is met is identity needs. We all have identity. What is your identity? What is your last name? What is your family tree all about? Well, that's a part of who your identity is. And there's many more parts to your identity. You're a male or you're a female. You are married or you are single, and on and on. You're like your dad or more like your mom, or you're equally between the two. And you begin to create this identity need assessment of yourself. Okay. Another one is social needs. We are built by God to be social. We have social needs, and those are legitimate. We need our friends. And when we get together, our friends, we just don't get together and sit there and look at each other and say nothing. No, we use communication, both verbal and nonverbal communication, to let them know our thinking about something. We have social needs met. Hey, would you like to go out to the football game tonight and maybe have some hot dogs and something cold to drink while we watch the football game? Yeah, hey, that sounds like a lot of fun. Let's go do it. A social need is met. The fourth and last one is practical needs. We all have practical needs that are met or needing to be met. And today, last night, my wife needed to go see the dentist at 7 o'clock in the morning, and she usually goes at that time, takes our dog for a walk. I take the dog for a walk in the evening because we can't always go at the same time. And so she asked me, can you take Lily out for a walk tonight? I can't do it. And I'm sorry, that's the name of our dog. She's a white boxer. And I met the practical need by saying, well, sure, of course, I'll go take the dog out for a walk this morning. So we have practical needs met. There are three major contexts of which we need to think about when it comes to the issue of communication. And one of them is the issue that we are dealing with in this class. It is the public communication context. In public communication, it's one-to-many, such as public speaking, debate, theater. Uh, this course is public speaking. You're learning about the principles, the science of public speaking, and then developing the art while you give your speeches on YouTube for me to give feedback. That is one of the communication contexts, public speaking. It's performance oriented. In other words, you, the speaker, it's up to you. Like when I watch you in the speech, it's up to you to do the job. You have to choose the topic. You have to organize what you're going to be saying based on the principles that we'll be looking at as we go along here. You have to then record yourself. You then have to take the speech and you have to put it on YouTube for me to get with a link in, so I can look at it. It's all up to you. You are the performer. You are the presenter of the speech. It is a prepared speech. It's a prepared message. You know, make sure when you're asked to speak in other settings that you prepare the speech. You don't leave it to the last minute and then something happens and you can't prepare and then you get up front thinking I'll fake people out. You don't fake too many people out that way. You certainly wouldn't fake me out. I've listened to too many speeches to know the difference between one prepared and one not prepared. I was asked a few years ago to be the keynote speaker. No, not the keynote. Yeah, a presenter. And I had almost 4 hours, about 3.5 hours, to the Professional Secretaries International, PSI. They had another speaker after lunch speak for the same length of time. And what was interesting is that I'll come back to this. I made some mistakes in my presentation. I didn't ask enough questions about what was happening before I spoke, and I should have. And I'll talk about that again later. But what I got there, and I got there early, I met them, people met me there, and then they said, oh, let us introduce you to the keynote speaker. He is the person who will speak for 30 minutes and then he'll be gone. Then the floor will be yours for the morning and then lunch, and then the ladies will, then the lady presenter in the afternoon will speak for the same length of time or share. And the man that was the keynote speaker was a well-known man in British Columbia at the time on TV. He was on TV news. I won't say for what specifically. There's either the news, the weather, or the sports, and I won't say which one, but he was well known. And I thought, oh no, I'm following this person. Oh, I wish I'd known this. But anyways, I stood at the back listening to him. He had 30 minutes and then I'm on. Here's the first thing he said. All the ladies were thrilled with this man. He's a person that everybody knows from TV. He goes, hi, my name, is such and such. And all the ladies went, because it was almost all ladies. And he said, I'm sure you've seen me on TV. And all the ladies went, and I'm getting sick to my stomach hearing this. And then he said something. He said, I accepted this role speaking to you, but I have to be really honest. I have nothing prepared. And I went, he had my attention. And then you know what he did? He spent 30 minutes proving that point, that he had nothing to say. 30 minutes. And as I'm standing at the back of the room, I realized that this is not good for the ladies, but it's good for me because you know what? I'm prepared. I have stuff to say. And I'm going to get compared to him and I'm going to come out okay because at least I'm prepared. I'm not going to waste their time at all. I was at the back of the room watching from the back, the ladies, their backs, and I could tell by the body movement that the more he spoke and said nothing, the more upset they got with him. Not a good scene. It's a prepared speech. There is very little verbal feedback. When you're giving a speech, usually people are just listening. They might be writing notes, but they're not giving any verbal feedback as a rule. So public speaking is what this course is about. There's the second form, and we don't go into this in this class. It's in my Comm 171 class. Some of you will take it. In fact, a little bit of my material comes from that class because I need to go over some of the stuff again. So if you took that class, a couple of things you're going to hear again, but that's good. It'll reinforce it. Social communication. It's more the one-to-one or the one-to-a-few. There's no performance per se. It's quite dynamic, to say the least. You know, you're with your friend or friends and you're sitting and you're talking, and one person says something and you interject a thought, and then somebody else interjects another thought, and you get a going back and forth. You might be laughing at what you're sharing because you all agree with this, or you might even be arguing with each other because you have differences of opinion, but it's very dynamic that's taking place as people are sharing and people are listening, and then people are speaking, and you have this going back and forth. So here's some settings where social communication, and if you were in MCOM 171, you'll recognize these ones right away. There's small group communication. We talked about that. I taught courses on small group communication. This course is not about small group communication. This course is about public speaking, but this is another family member related to the big communication area. Another is interpersonal. Those are two very close lips. Interpersonal is not just kissing. It's really having friends and sitting down and talking, having a chat about something. It's interpersonal, asking people what's happening in their lives and so forth and going on. Today, I just heard Joanne, my wife, she was saying some friends of ours, the woman turned 65 today. Well, we have a very good relationship with them, and she's going to make sure she says happy birthday to them. So interpersonal communication is an important part of this section, this area of social communication, of which we're not getting into. Intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is talking to yourself. It's a voice within yourself that you listen to, and we all have it. We all do it. In fact, we do this probably more than almost any other communication style. And I did share this in the last class. I think I'll do it again, where I will talk about the nonverbal communication factors, because it really impacts public speaking. You know, you need to be aware that what you say in your mind can directly impact what happens. If you go to give a speech and you say, I'm going to do terrible, I'm going to do terrible, I'm going to do terrible, you're likely going to do terrible because you talked yourself into it. And that's not healthy. So we'll look at the 10 traps of self-talk. Family communication, really important. I talk about that in my MCOM 171 class. It's an important area. Well, this class is not about this is about public speaking, not about family communication, but that's a part of that, this family of social communication. One of our closest social connections are with our parents or with our siblings. Then there's organizational communication. Many, if not all of us, will probably work in some sort of organization, and there should be some organizational processing that's there, and that will impact this. This is a big field, a big and important area to really know much about. Well, that is the social communication. So we have that issue related to public communication. Then we have social communication, and now we have mediated communication. This course is not about that. This is just giving you total context. It's the one-to-one and yet one-to-many at the same time. You know, have you ever been watching, say, the news on TV here or wherever you live, and you're watching it on TV, and a person's sitting in front of a camera and they're speaking, but as they're speaking in front of that camera, you are sitting in your house, your family room, your TV room, and you're watching. And many hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people are all over the area, all watching the same channel at the same time. Mediated communication. All sorts of settings: radio, TV, film, video, Facebook, internet, tweet, so forth. Mass communication happening. Okay, now I want to take time to talk about the models of communication. This is very brief. You're not getting an exam about this. All I'm doing today is giving context that we understand these things, and I'll be coming right directly back to public speaking again. We have one model. It's called the linear. In the word linear is the word line, L-I-N-E. That, in essence, is what this is. It's a direct line. It is one-way communication. One person is speaking, many people are listening to what's being said. It's not two-way in the sense of conversation, it's more a presentation. It starts with the sender and it ends with the receiver. I'm sending a message right now, going through these PowerPoints, and you're receiving. And there will be a few days of where I'm going through my PowerPoints and you'll be listening. And you need to take this in and then use this to shape your speeches. Features. It's sender-centered. It's dependent on you, the sender. And your speech is dependent on you. It's one way and it's one time. Once you've said it, it's been said. You don't get halfway through a speech or partway through a speech, say, okay, stop. Okay, I'm starting all over again. I'm going to start the speech over again. You can't do that. You have to continue because people are still going to remember what you said. It's one way. People are either the sender or the receiver, and it's now, and then it's over. It impacts all listeners equally. That doesn't mean everybody listens to the same things exactly the same way or whatever, but all are there, and unless they have a hearing problem, are equally able to understand or at least be able to listen to what is being said. Here's a graphic of the linear model. You have an arrow on the left hand of this oval circle and double arrow on the right side. And it's all going in the same direction. And what you have on one end is a sender. And the sender has a message they're going to want to get across, whether it's no, I do not care to have any dessert, or I love you, or yes, I'll buy your product, whatever it happens to be, it's a message. And they have a channel by which that's done. It could be live, it could be Zoom, it could be telephone, it could be YouTube, it could be interpersonal, it goes on and on. But a person has a message and a channel, a sender, and you have the person who's the receiver taking the message in. Okay, now this is part of the model. I'm going to show the rest of the model, but I'm going to refer back to this model as I show the other model because I didn't want to make the same presentation again. So you'll see what I mean in a moment. The second, after the looking at the linear, is looking now at the issue of the interactive or the circular model. People pay attention to what the other is saying and they respond accordingly. If I were to meet you in the hallway somewhere and I say, oh, yes, you're in my classroom. How are you doing right now with COVID-19? I ask you a question and I expect you to give me a response. You might say, not so well. or I'm doing fine, I'm surviving, or whatever might be your response. But you're listening to what I'm saying, and then you give a response. It's not always a question. It could be quite something else. The sender stimulates a response from the receiver. Like I said, it could be a question, or it could be a provocative statement that makes you think, and then you have a response. So the idea is it's not one way, it's circular. If I say, "How are you doing?" I expect you to say back to me, "I'm doing terrible, I'm doing fine, I'm doing okay," a response. It must have feedback. It must have feedback. How are you doing? You don't just sit there and look at me, you answer. And then you might ask me, "How are you doing?" And I don't just sit and look at you like, "What in the world are you asking me that question for?" I give feedback back. It's interaction centered. So basically, no matter what am I saying here is, it's a conversation. It's a transactional two-way communication process that's going on here. So it looks different than one way. And what you got is a sender on the left who sends a message to the receiver on the right, but then the receiver on the right responds and becomes the sender, sending back a message, and the original sender is the receiver. So what you got is this happening. You have the sender sending a message through a channel to a receiver, who then responds, becomes the sender with a message you through a channel back to the original sender. It's a conversation that's taking place. Now, this is different than the one-way communication. But what I'm about to put on are true of both of them. There are other elements involved in the one-way and the two-way that are similar. One of them is the issue of environment. Environment. Both have environments. They might be unique, they might be different. You can have all sorts of environments happening in any sort of setting. One environment setting can be a hostile environment. I've had hostile environments. I have spoken in front of audiences that did not want to listen to me. I had people in one situation, presentation, that actually refused to come into the room where I was speaking. The room was already packed with people, but they decided they'd go for a walk. I was the keynote speaker, and they had come to go to all the workshops, not to listen to me. What were they upset about regarding me? My philosophical basis of life. Mine comes from a Christian worldview. And so it was determined that about 2/3 to 3/4 of the audience were hostile towards me. Most came showing some respect, some didn't come. It was an interesting environment. You might have a joyful environment. You might have a birthday party happening, and everybody's happy for the person who turned another year older, and you sing happy birthday to them, and everybody's laughing and having a good time. Well, that's another type of environment that takes place. You might have an environment of students gathering together, all working on studying for a major exam that they're all going to be taking. And so they're asking each other questions related to the material. And that's an environment of tension, of focus, trying to prepare for an exam. You can have an environment that is quite strange. I had to speak in a church in Bellingham, just in the state of Washington, just south of here, not very far from where I am right now. And what happened was, we actually had a person from the occult visit and try to disturb me while I was giving a message. That's an environment. I had an environment where I had to speak in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, at a place that fed people who uh, lived off on the streets, who were alcoholics and so forth, and lived a very difficult life. And for them to come into this place, they got a free meal, but what they had to do was sit in and listen to my message, and then they got a free meal. And had a 15 or 20 minutes to talk, and the room was full. And I remember one man, he was very drunk, slowly slid out of his chair onto the ground, laid down, and went to sleep and snored as I was speaking. Now, that was a very different environment, not an easy one to say the least. So there's all sorts of environments. Another factor that's really important to think about are the issue of words. Words are powerful. And the reality is that you and I have been given by God an incredible organ in the head, in the body, called the brain. And it has such a capacity to store information. Do you know you don't come out into this world through birth with a vocabulary? You develop a vocabulary in the environment of family as a rule or other settings. And as you're listening to words, you suddenly begin to associate certain words with either items or people, and you store that. For instance, you may have a word for your dad. You might call him dad or daddy or papa. And for your mother, you might call her mom or mummy or mama. But we have these words. We create these words in our brains. And then the older we get, the more words we have. We've been encoding them. We've been getting to put meaning to them. This word means him. He's my dad. So the word dad or father and other words are and put into our brains. And over time, we store hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words. And then when a person's speaking, our brain puts all those words together and knows that you have just been asked by that person whether I would like another dish of dessert. So I've encoded that. I've encoded words, but now they're used, and I decode how the words are being used to give meaning. Meaning, if I said to you, would you like another dessert? You go like, would I like another dessert? 4 words. I'm asking a question. It's an invitation for more dessert. Do I want, and I can hold my dish out and say, yes, thank you. Or I can say, ooh, that's enough. Thank you very much. But your brain goes, so you've encoded all these brains, and then as they're used, all these words in your brain, and as they're used, you begin to put these words together and you decode meaning. And that's what's going on all the time in our interpersonal relationships and in when somebody's speaking. Another factor that we have take place both in one-way and two-way communication, and we're looking at one-way communication here in regard to this course, is noise. There's all sorts of noise taking place. Physiological noise. People getting up and walking while you're speaking. People coughing. A baby crying. Just over a year ago, in a course there was only one door in and out of the classroom, and so we had our speakers up front, each taking a turn to speak. And I'm sitting over here. The door's over to my left, and I'm sitting over here, and I'm listening. And a student who is over in the far side of the classroom during the speech got up, literally walked in front of the student who was giving the speech and walked out the door. That was noise. Not loud noise, but movement of somebody doing something distracted everybody. And that's what noise can do. It can distract. It can be physical. It can be emotional noise that distracts and makes it difficult. And so we have to make adjustments to all those sorts of things when it happens. And so that is the two-way communication with these the environment and encoding, decoding, and noise in it. But there are other factors that are important for us to realize. And one of them is the fact that communication is simultaneous in regard to sending and receiving. As you are standing in front of an audience and you're speaking, they're receiving. But as you are speaking and they're receiving, you, if an experienced speaker, you begin to pay attention to the nonverbal feedback. Are they yawning? Are they sitting forward? Are they giving you a look of not sure I agree with you, or I don't know if I can trust you, or I'm really listening, this is very interesting? All that nonverbal communication is taking place as you're speaking. So everything is simultaneous. Public speaking is not flat. Dynamic things are happening. Sending and receiving a message is happening all the time. Your audience individually cannot not communicate. And you're taking in those. Another is that in regard to both models, what's happening is fluid, not static. Dynamism is taking place as you're speaking, the words you're using, and the meaning to those words, and the changes in people because of the words you're using. It's very fluid. It's not static, standing still. There is definite movement taking place. Also, we need to realize that all communication is relational, not individual. I don't mean that it's not for individual people, but it's not all about you, the speaker. It's about building a relationship with your audience. You become a servant leader to your audience as you are sharing. Never forget that. It's about your audience. Pay attention to them the whole time. Factors that are important to both the linear and circular models. I've already kind of gone over this in my model. First, there's noise in both. There's noise. There's psychological noise. There's physical noise taking place. Always be aware that people can have other things on their mind when they come in, when you speak. There's always context. There's always context to your speech. Be aware of that. There's always context to your speech. Be aware of that. Whatever that setting is, you need to be paying attention to what context there is. That means you should really do audience analysis to understand who you'll be speaking to. That's important. I'll share later a contextual moment when I blew it, and I paid a kind of an emotional price as I had to speak in front of an audience for a whole week, from Sunday night till Friday night at different times. And I didn't understand the context until after, or well, almost completely after. See, it assumes complex and ongoing process. Public speaking, any communication is complex. The power of words, understanding words, is complex. It's a process that never stops. It's ongoing. And then it assumes irreversibility. When it's said, it's said. It's history. You can ask for forgiveness. You can be forgiven. But that doesn't mean you didn't say it. Fact is, you did say it. Speech types fall on the artistic technical continuum. The fact is that we have over here the artistic, and we have way over here the technical. Okay, and we need to understand that this is more the art of it, and this is more the science of it. So on the technical side, we have TV, film, video, radio, all those technical sorts of things, computers and how we're used, PowerPoints and how they're used. And then what we have over here is the artistic side. We have reader's theater, we have oral interpretation. So theater over here, TV, film over here. So much more technical, and over here, much more artistic. Here's public speaking. It sits right in the middle. It borrows from the technical, the science of public speaking, and it borrows from the artistic process of actually making a presentation. So that just helps you understand. Here's public speaking. It's concerned about the science, it's concerned about the art. So both these sides are really important. I want to talk about 7 elements. There's just 2 more things I want to talk about. One are the 7 elements public speaking. And then I really quickly want to talk about your first speech, and it won't take me very long on that one. Elements in public speaking, there are 7 of them. First element is the source or the sender. You, when you give a speech, you are the sender, you are the source. This is an important factor. It's the person who makes the decision to communicate. And in public speaking, when you are giving your speech, you clearly have to be the one who's made the decision, I'm going to give the speech, because I've been have to in my class. I've agreed to in a public speaking setting outside this class. You're the sender. If you have a sender, you have a receiver. The receiver is the person who receives and perceives the message sent by the sender. This word perception, perceive here. We're going to talk about this later in the semester. It's really important. It's how your audience, the person who receives, how they perceive you. That's really important. I consider this, actually this word here in public speaking, the most important issue. And we'll talk about that later. Then there's the message, the source, the sender, the receiver, then the message. It's that which involves the ideas, attitudes, and values of the speaker as expressed verbally and non-verbally. So when you give your short little speech next week, okay, it's your idea, it's your attitudes, it's about you, your values, and how you express them. And I'll be watching you verbally and non-verbally as you make your presentation. Then there's the channel. The channel is the means of transmitting the oral message. You know, it's how you're going to choose it. This involves face-to-face or media, whatever. What's the channel? Our channel is Zoom, this technology, which allows us to keep the academics going for you, and you can keep developing as a student. There are the barriers, number 5. Those are the factors that interrupt the communication process and potentially causes incorrect meaning to be accepted. From somebody talking when you're speaking, somebody coughing, a baby crying, too warm of a room, too cold of a room, people who don't care, people who are more focused on some bad news situations that totally changes the capacity to be able to speak. A few years ago, I had to give I was a professor on the campus, and we were meeting, and I had one huge barrier that day. A student of ours in that class was no longer there because on the weekend he drowned in the Pacific Ocean. And it was a few days later that they found his body, but he drowned. In my class, I go into my class, everybody's hurt, everybody knows. He sat in the room with all these students. He talked, he was a really well-liked guy. He died. I can still see his face. I can still see his face, and that's many years ago. Boy, was that a barrier to teaching that day. You know, what really made it sad and difficult for me is that the term paper had already been written, and I had to read his term paper and give a grade to it, even though he had passed away. That was a very awkward time. But barriers can get in the way and make communication difficult. There's the feedback, the nonverbal reactions and responses given by the receiver as perceived by the source and sender. So you, the sender, can also perceive things about your audience, about their nonverbal feedback, their interest. And the last one, it's the situation. It's all the elements that contribute to the dynamic moment in which a message is being given and received. Room noise, emotional climate, like when that student died, and the emotional climate in the room, they were really sad. It was a very difficult time. Somehow we had to still work that through and still be able to teach. It was not an easy time. Okay, last thought. This is next week, you're giving your first speech. Next week, you're giving your first speech. And so here's some important things. to remember. Have a positive attitude. So when you set up your podium or whatever you're going to use, and and please don't get up close like this. Don't let me just see your face. Go back. Let's be able to see more of you. If you're going to be sitting, get way back like this so I can see more of you. Otherwise, set up a camera on a stand of some sort and something you can use as a podium. Like I said, I spoke in this classroom and I used an ironing board and I put some towels to hold my notes up to give my presentation. Okay, so make sure you do that, but have a positive attitude. Use positive self-talk, and we'll talk about that again a little bit later, I hope, in this course. Select your focus. In this case, it's the next speech you're giving, which is in next week. It's about yourself. Okay, it's about you. You are to talk about a unique thing about you and use a story or stories that helps develop that. It's a 3 to 4 minute speech. You don't have to do any research because you're researching yourself. Now organize your speech. You should have an introduction, short little introduction. You should have a body, maybe 1 or 2 things about you. If you do one thing, share this one thing. Maybe you are a very determined person. And people have always said, when you say you're going to do something, you go out and your way to do it. And here's what the dictionary defines determined as. And now let me illustrate this with a couple of stories of my life that really demonstrates that I'm a determined person. And then the conclusion is to don't to say, well, that's it, I'm finished. But you say, as you can see, my focus is being determined. And I did that by my stories. I hope that you will seriously think about the value of being a determined person. Something like that, whatever you do. Organize your speech with an introduction, body, and a conclusion. Develop language that is familiar to you and clarifies for your audience so that everybody gets it. You can use new words, but when you use those new words, let people understand what in the world those new words mean in the context by which you use them. Practice your speech physically. Listen, stand up somewhere, wherever you're going to give it, and actually practice it. Physically practice a speech. I was a little league baseball coach in Calgary years ago for 1 year before moving to the West Coast. And we met as a team in the morning before school and after supper in the evening, and we practiced physically. And then what I did is I had the players sit around me, and we mentally talked about different things to see ourselves, so we would know what we're supposed to do at certain times. And this team, by the way, was a bunch of players that had registered to be able to play in the league, but all the coaches had already chosen all the players they wanted, and there was enough players left over for one more team. They phoned me, said, would I be willing to take the team? And I did. These are the players the other coaches did not want. These players were the players that were really not that good. So I worked so hard with them. And the other teams used to tease us. They all had uniforms. We didn't have one because we were the extra team. The other team coaches told their players that we were the leftovers. Nobody else wanted us. And so it was the players and me against the rest of the teams. We had to play each team twice. There were 7 other teams. We had to play 14 games. Our record at the end of the season, 13 wins, 1 loss. So mentally, I did that with the students. See yourself making certain plays along physically doing it. So when you see yourself as a speaker, see yourself mentally walking up to the podium. Remember, as you're going up to the podium, you are the speaker. I'm not just talking for this class. I'm talking about when you give a speech somewhere else. The moment you are moving, you are the speaker. People are paying attention. They're making evaluations. You walk up there like you don't really care. People know it. Look at the audience for just a second. Don't gaze at them, but just a moment, enough to let them know I'm ready to start. Please listen. See yourself mentally giving the first line. Practice it. And if you have trouble with that, write it out. That's one of the most important parts of a speech. Not the most important thing you'll say, but critical. Dealing with the unexpected. Create in your mind an unexpected, a baby crying and you have to keep speaking, whatever. Work on that stories that you're going to be telling. In your mind, practice it, practice it. See yourself giving your introduction and the conclusion. Practice it in your mind. Practice in your mind. See, you're working your mind. Giving a transition. I'm going from my characteristic of me. Now I'm going to be sharing how that actually works out in actual life. Here's a story. Giving the whole speech. In your mind, go through the whole speech. Being dynamic. See yourself being dynamic. More dynamic than normally you are. It helps. See yourself walking back to your desk or wherever it is after you give the speech. You see, you are the speaker the whole time. People pay attention to you the whole time. Last thought, get the proper rest and food before the speech. Listen, you need sleep and you need rest. What am I saying? You need energy. A 30-minute speech, about a 30-minute speech is the equivalent of about 1 day of 8 hours of hard labor physically to the body. Be aware of that. Okay, I have to stop. I'm done. And I trust that you will remember that your speeches are due next Monday, that we're not meeting next week, but we're meeting the Monday after, and need to get those speeches done. You need to develop them. You need to record them. You need to get them on to YouTube and send me the link so I can evaluate and send you back a response. That's it. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
sir.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.